Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that celebrates connection, where being surrounded by friends, followers, and group chats is seen as a sign of being okay. So when a woman finds herself alone with no close friends to call, no girls' night to attend, no safe circle to fall into, it's not just loneliness she feels, it's shame. But let me tell you something that we don't say out loud. Many women are walking through life profoundly alone, silently carrying the weight of that isolation like a secret. And that silence, it's deafening. This isn't just about being introverted or socially selective. It's about the quiet grief that comes when you realize the friendships you once nurtured have faded or perhaps never truly existed in the way you hoped. It's about scrolling through photos of brunches and bachelorette trips and wondering, what's wrong with me? And the truth is nothing. There is nothing inherently broken about a woman who doesn't have a friend group. But the world tells her otherwise. It tells her she must be cold or jealous or difficult. But maybe, just maybe, she's just been hurt. Maybe she gave everything in relationships and got breadcrumbs in return. Maybe she set boundaries that others didn't like. Maybe she grew. What if the absence of friendships isn't a failure, but a signal, a sign that the friendship she craves must be deep, mutual, and rooted in authenticity, not obligation? Loneliness is not just the absence of people around us. It's the absence of feeling seen, valued, and connected. For many women, that absence turns into something far heavier: shame. It's the quiet voice that says, "What's wrong with me?" When you see others laughing over coffee, hugging at reunions, or posting group selfies tagged "My Girls for Life," we rarely talk about this form of isolation because it doesn't look dramatic on the outside. It doesn't cry for help in public. It wears lipstick. It goes to work. It nods politely in meetings. But inside, it carries a question that feels like a wound. Why don't I belong? That wound deepens because our cultures has created an unrealistic narrative about friendship, especially for women. From childhood, we're told that best friends are forever, that sisterhood is natural, and that we should always have a group, a tribe to turn to. So when we grow up and realize that people drift, betray, disappoint, or disappear, we blame ourselves. Society doesn't prepare us for that kind of emotional erosion. It doesn't say, hey, sometimes you'll be the only one in your season of growth. Instead, it makes the woman with no friends feel like a glitch in the system. And shame loves silence. It thrives in hiding. That's why many women pretend they're fine, even when the H of loneliness is almost unbearable. The shame of loneliness also grows because it's taboo. A woman can talk about her heartbreak over a romantic breakup, and people will rush to comfort her. But mention that you don't have friends, real, close, dependable friends, and suddenly there's judgment in the air. People tilt their heads and ask quietly, why? As if it's a disease. We've pathologized solitude in women. We assume if she's alone, she must be difficult, or jealous, or bitter. We don't ask if maybe she just values honesty and found herself surrounded by shallow people. We don't wonder if she walked away from toxicity to protect her peace. Instead, we jump to assumptions that deepen her shame and shrink her voice. This hidden shame is compounded by social media, which often feels like a 24/7 reminder of what you're missing. When your feed is flooded with brunches, girls' trips, and birthday surprises, loneliness begins to look like failure. Even if those moments online are curated and sometimes exaggerated, they still land like daggers when you're already questioning your worth. Loneliness becomes layered It's not just about not having someone to call. It's about feeling like you're the only one in the world who feels this way. And that illusion of being alone in your loneliness is where shame does its most dangerous work. But here's the truth. You are not the only one. There are countless women, strong, compassionate, intelligent women who feel this same ache but keep it hidden. They show up for their jobs. They parent their kids. They take care of aging parents. They smile at neighbors. And then, behind closed doors, they feel the weight of not having someone to text when they're sad, not having someone to share inside jokes with, not having someone who truly knows them. And it's not because they're broken. It's because we don't talk about how normal this is. We don't talk about how messy and fragile adult friendships can be, especially when life gets busy, values shift, and boundaries are drawn. Loneliness, when met with silence and shame, becomes suffering. But when we bring it into the light, when we talk about it openly and name it without judgment, we take the first step toward healing. We break the myth that friendship is always easy. We dismantle the lie that needing connection makes us needy. And we begin to understand that the woman with no friends is not weak. She is human, profoundly human. Her story is not a story of lack. It's a story waiting to be heard, held, and honored without shame. There's a silent grief that comes with losing a friendship, especially one you thought would last forever. We don't give it enough space to be mourned. Romantic heartbreak has its rituals. There are songs, advice columns, and sympathy from friends. But when a friendship ends, especially for reasons that feel unclear or gradual, it leaves a woman standing alone with unanswered questions and a self-blame that cuts deep. Was I too much? Not enough? Did I say something wrong? We wonder. And those questions don't just linger, they become beliefs. But here's a truth we don't say often enough. Not all friendships end because someone did something wrong. Sometimes they end because we grow. Sometimes they end because we stop shrinking. The problem is that when a woman chooses to honor her boundaries, when she stops playing small to fit in or stops tolerating unhealthy dynamics, she's often cast as the one who changed. And when change is painted as betrayal, she's left with guilt instead of pride. We need to stop turning personal evolution into a villain story. Friendship loss also happens in silence, slowly, over time, through unmet needs and one-sided effort. Maybe you kept checking in. Maybe you always made the plans. Maybe you kept forgiving things you never got an apology for. And then one day, you just stopped, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. And that moment is complex, because even though your mind knows you did your best, your heart still feels the sting of being the one who cared more. It feels like rejection, even when it's relief, and then comes the judgment, not always from others, but from within. We live in a world that romanticizes lifelong best friends. So when you find yourself without that, it feels like failure. But it's not. The number of friendships you hold at any moment doesn't reflect your worth. Relationships end, they fade, they shift, and sometimes they need to. A friendship that once felt safe can outgrow you, or you can outgrow it. And while that realization is painful, it doesn't make you wrong, it makes you real. When a friendship ends, we rarely allow ourselves the same compassion we'd offer others. If your friend told you someone stopped talking to her after she expressed her needs, would you say, "You were wrong to ask for that"? Of course not. You'd remind her that real connection doesn't punish authenticity. But when it happens to us, we internalize it as shame. We convince ourselves we were the problem. And sometimes That belief is more damaging than the friendship ever was. But there is healing in reframing. What if the end of a friendship isn't a verdict on your character, but a reflection of your truth? What if it's not about being too sensitive or too distant, but about being honest? The end of a connection can be the beginning of clarity. You're allowed to want reciprocity. You're allowed to stop chasing people who keep disappearing. You're allowed to grieve someone and still know it wasn't your fault. Because sometimes love doesn't fail, alignment does. And that's no one's fault. Isolation is often seen as a red flag, something to be fixed, something to run from. We're told that if we're alone, something must be wrong. But what if isolation, rather than being a punishment, is an invitation? What if this quiet, lonely space that you didn't choose, or maybe did, is actually a threshold, a beginning, not an ending? For many women, the season of having no friends can feel like a desert, but under the surface, something powerful is shifting. Growth rarely looks beautiful when it's happening. It's messy and isolating, but it's real. There comes a moment in every woman's life when the noise fades, whether by life's force or by personal choice, and she is left with herself. That silence can feel unbearable at first. It's in that quiet that old wounds start speaking. Regrets get louder, insecurities echo, but it's also in that space that clarity begins to rise. With no audience to perform for, she begins to ask questions she never had time for. What do I really want in a friendship? What do I need from others and from myself? Isolation turns down the volume of the world and turns up the voice within. Transformation doesn't happen in crowded rooms. It happens in the stillness, in the solitude, in the moments when you feel like no one sees you and you begin to see yourself. This is the paradox. Loneliness feels like emptiness, but it can actually be fertile ground. During this time, many women rediscover passions, values, and truths they abandoned while trying to belong. They stop measuring their worth by who includes them and start building an inner world that doesn't crumble with rejection. They begin healing from the inside out. Of course, this transformation doesn't erase the pain. The ache of isolation is real. There's nothing romantic about crying in silence or longing for connection. But what is brave is staying in that space long enough to hear the deeper message. Sometimes isolation isn't a sign you've failed socially. It's a sign you've stopped settling. You no longer want surface level friendships or performative loyalty. You want something truer. And for that kind of relationship to arrive, something in you has to shift first. The isolation becomes a cocoon, not because you're hiding, but because you're preparing. In this season, a woman often finds her voice, the one that doesn't need to be approved or echoed. She starts noticing patterns. She reflects on why she ignored red flags in the past, why she overgave, why she silenced herself just to keep people around. These aren't comfortable realizations. They're raw, but they're liberating. And as she pieces herself back together, not for others, but for herself, something changes. She stops fearing loneliness. It may still ache, but it doesn't define her anymore. When that shift happens, even subtly, she begins to walk differently in the world. She becomes more discerning, more rooted, more aligned. New friendships may come, but they won't fill a void. They'll complement a wholeness she fought to create. This is what transformation through isolation looks like. It's not a glamorous journey. It's not quick, but it's sacred. And the woman who walks through it will never again settle for half-hearted connection because she now knows the power of being whole even when alone. When you're a woman with no friends, the world gets loud with opinions and quiet with understanding. People might not say it out loud, but the looks, the comments, the subtle distancing, they all send the same message: you must have done something wrong. And that message can turn inward quietly but viciously. Why don't I belong? What did I do to deserve this? Am I hard to love? These aren't just thoughts. They're daggers. And without self-compassion, they land in the deepest places. But here's the truth: the most vital relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And that relationship must begin with mercy. Self-compassion is not soft. It's not self-pity. It's fierce. It's the decision to stand beside yourself, especially when no one else does. It's saying, even if they misunderstood me, I will not abandon myself. It's knowing you are still worthy of kindness, your own, even if the world hasn't mirrored it back lately. For many women, the absence of friends triggers an avalanche of self-doubt. But self-compassion is what builds the emotional scaffolding to survive it. Not just survive, grow from it. When friendships fall apart or never form the way we longed for, it's easy to internalize rejection as proof that we're too intense, too complicated, too needy, too quiet, whatever the narrative may be. But self-compassion challenges that. It says, maybe you were just honest. Maybe you were growing faster than they were. Maybe your standards finally rose to meet your self-worth. And instead of turning against yourself, you begin to recognize that not every loss is a reflection of failure. Sometimes it's a sign of rising. This self-kindness doesn't come naturally for most of us. We were taught to be polite, to accommodate, to be easy to like. So when we end up alone, whether by choice or by the slow decay of connection, we blame ourselves instead of comforting ourselves. But what if the first step isn't to fix your social life? What if the first step is sitting beside yourself and saying, I see your pain and I still love you. I honor your heart even when it's aching. That is the essence of self-compassion. It doesn't erase the loneliness, but it softens it. It makes it bearable, livable, even transformative. Self-compassion also teaches us how to set boundaries without guilt. Because when you begin treating yourself with tenderness, you start to require it from others. You no longer tolerate friendships rooted in convenience or control. You recognize that being alone is hard, but being with the wrong people is often harder. So you stop forcing connection where there is no respect. You stop betraying yourself just to belong. And this shift, this deep honoring of your own experience, is the beginning of self-trust, a kind of inner safety that no one can take from you. The woman who practices self-compassion becomes less defined by who shows up and more grounded in how she shows up for herself. She no longer asks, why doesn't anyone love me? But instead, am I loving myself through this? And that one question can change everything, because in a world that often demands you prove your worth, choosing to give yourself grace is a radical act of rebellion and of healing. Friendships may come or not, but the relationship with yourself is the one constant. Let it be gentle. Let it be kind. Let it be home. There's a dangerous lie floating quietly beneath the surface of our culture. A lie that whispers, if you were worthy, you wouldn't be alone. It doesn't always say it out loud. Sometimes it just shows up in the empty seat next to you, in the unanswered text, in the party you weren't invited to. It sneaks into your spirit during the holidays, in the silence after a long day, or when you need someone and there's no one to call. And if you're not careful, you'll start to believe it. You'll mistake absence for inadequacy. But the truth is, being alone does not mean you are unworthy. Being alone is a circumstance. Worthiness is your birthright. Your value does not decrease because people don't show up. That's a hard truth to hold on to when loneliness feels like rejection. When others gather and you're not included, it's easy to think there's something wrong with you. But inclusion doesn't always reflect your goodness. It often reflects dynamics, timing, emotional maturity, and things you cannot control. People come and go for reasons that rarely make sense. You might have shown up with your whole heart and still been overlooked. That does not make you any less valuable. It simply means you were not met where you were. Being alone tests your ability to separate who you are from how others treat you. That separation is the core of emotional resilience. It's saying, even if I am not seen right now, I still see myself. Even if I'm not chosen, I will not abandon myself. This is the work. The quiet, soul, deep work of anchoring your worth in something unshakable. In a world where belonging often feels transactional, this is not easy, but it's necessary because when you build worthiness from within, you stop begging for scraps of connection. You start demanding presence, not performance. Some of the most powerful women you'll ever meet have walked through seasons of deep aloneness. Not because they were undesirable, but because they stopped settling, they stopped performing to be liked, they stopped bending to stay included. And in doing so, they created space, painful space for something real to enter. Sometimes it takes being alone to remember that you are not meant to be tolerated. You are meant to be embraced. You are not a burden to be managed. You are a soul to be met. There's a beauty in solitude that is often overlooked. It allows you to rebuild your identity from the inside out. You're no longer reflecting others' expectations. You're discovering your truth. You begin to know your own rhythms, your desires, your fears. You get honest about what kind of relationships nourish you and which ones drain you. And once you know that, truly know that, you can no longer unknow it. You begin to choose differently, speak differently, move differently, and though that transformation may cost you company in the short term, it will return to you in the form of deeper, more authentic connections later on. Being a woman with no friends does not make you unlovable. It often means you're in the midst of becoming. You are worthy not because of who walks beside you, but because of who you are when you walk alone. Worthy, not because someone chooses you, but because you've chosen yourself, and no silence, no exclusion, no empty room can erase that. Your worth is not up for debate. Not now, not ever. Loneliness, especially in women, is often seen not just as unfortunate, but as suspicious. As if being without friends is somehow an indication of your character, a sign that you've done something wrong. But this is one of the most dangerous cultural messages we absorb, that loneliness is evidence of unworthiness, that being alone is a reflection of personal failure. We don't just feel lonely, we feel ashamed of being lonely. And that shame keeps us from reaching out, from telling the truth, from healing, because when we believe we are to blame for our isolation, we stop ourselves from seeking connection in the very moments we need it most. This message isn't always loud or direct. Sometimes it's coded in phrases like, you need to be easier to get along with, or maybe you're just too intense, or you should put yourself out there more. These comments might sound harmless, but they reinforce a deeper belief that loneliness is something you caused and something you deserve. That belief is incredibly destructive. It makes women shrink, perform, people please, all in an attempt to escape the label of the woman no one wants to be around. We must dismantle this narrative because loneliness is not a moral shortcoming. It's a human experience. There are so many reasons a woman might find herself without friends: grief, betrayal, boundaries, relocation, trauma, growth. And yet, instead of meeting her with compassion, the world often meets her with judgment. She's labeled as bitter, as guarded, as difficult. But no one stops to ask, what did she have to endure to become this careful? We don't examine her story. We skip straight to conclusion. That's the failure, not her solitude. The failure is in our cultural response to women who dare to live without the armor of a social circle. It takes an extraordinary amount of strength to be a woman who walks alone, not because she wants to necessarily, but because she refuses to be where she doesn't feel seen, respected, or safe. It takes even more courage to admit that the absence of connection hurts, that you long for community, but not at the expense of your truth. And in that honesty, there is power, because the woman who no longer blames herself for her loneliness begins to reclaim her narrative. She no longer walks with her head down. She walks with intention. We need to collectively stop assigning blame to the person who is hurting. Loneliness is not a crime. It is not a diagnosis. It is not an identity. It is a moment, sometimes a long one, but a moment that does not define who you are or what you are worth. We must learn to sit with lonely people without trying to fix them, without assuming something is wrong with them. Because often there is nothing broken, only unmet needs, unhealed pain, or unspoken truths. And if we could just learn to meet those things with empathy instead of suspicion, we'd create a softer, safer world for all of us. The woman with no friends is not a cautionary tale. She is a call to compassion. She is a reminder that we live in a world that celebrates performative connection and punishes emotional honesty. And the way we treat her, the way we speak about her, to her and around her, says more about us than it does about her. So let's stop making loneliness into a moral failure. Let's start treating it like what it is: a human experience worthy of kindness, curiosity, and care. So if you are that woman, the one who sits alone at lunch, who doesn't get the group texts, who walks into rooms where no one saves her a seat, I want you to hear this. You are not invisible. You are not broken. You are not too much or not enough. You are in a sacred chapter of your life that doesn't need to be rushed or resented. You are learning how to belong to yourself first. Let the world take its time to catch up. Let friendships take their time to deepen. But in the meantime, let you be the one who offers compassion to your own heart, because you are still here, still showing up, still choosing truth over performance, solitude over pretense, healing over habit. And that, my friend, is not weakness. That is strength. You do not need a full table to be full. You do not need an audience to be real. The woman with no friends is not a sad story. She is a strong one. She is a reminder that connection begins inside. And when the right people come, because they will, she will welcome them not from a place of need, but from a place of knowing her own worth. So don't let the silence scare you. Let it shape you. Don't let loneliness define you. Let it refine you. And above all else, never forget, even if you walk alone, you are walking toward something. And that something is you